why so many people, not only here, but around the world, are using independent press now to get their work out. Because it's a little bit like that old thing about if the tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear. I think writers feel that way. If we're going to go to all the effort of writing something and there's no one out there to read it, what's the point? And so that's why it's fun for me to be able to be here to share with you some of the information that I've put in my book. You won't be able to see it very clearly from here. I have my business cards over in the bulletin board area. But the story of the cover of my book is kind of fun. I had designed the cover to have this space all be red. And my friends at my writers group said, no, you've got to have a graphic there. And I said, well, I'm not going to put Lake Chapala at sunset. That's been done. And so I was in the back of my mind was trying to figure out what I would put on there. I was on, to me, a new website, Pinterest, which to me is kind of like electronic hoarding, and it's really kind of fun because you don't have a storage problem. And stumbled across this image. This is American Gothic by Grant Wood. And these people have been put into serapes and put into our world. And it was so perfect for the book I wanted to write. I found the artist, it's a Photoshop deal, found the artist. He had entered this image into a contest in the United States. The title of the contest was Mexican Immigration. So he has gringos in Mexico, which is kind of fun. And he lives in Brazil. I contacted him and asked it had images of $300, $500. God only knows what he was going to charge me to use the image. Asked him about using it, told him what my book was going to be about. And he said, send me a copy of your book and use it with joy. So that's the story of the cover. As she mentioned, I moved here in 1990. I was young at that point. I'll save you the math. I'm 68. I was 45 when I got here in 1990. My children had just gone off to college. My youngest child was going off to college. And it was kind of that deal that every parent secretly hopes for, the opportunity to move far enough away that the kids can't come back home. And it worked. They came to visits while they were in school, and they loved it. They were all going to be in the Midwest in school, and I was living in Southern California. And so we were going to be 1,800 miles apart anyway. And I didn't think it made much difference whether I was south of them or west of them. So that's one of the reasons I came when I did. The other was I was very ill at that time with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. I had been bedridden. I had been through the whole thing. I canceled my trip to Mexico, my preliminary trip to Mexico twice, and finally got here. And never looked back. My friends were insisting that I come to Mexico, that I go on vacation. When I came back from a week in Mexico and said I'm moving to Mexico, then they thought I really had lost my mind. This is part of the first chapter. This is living at Lake Chapala. This is the book I needed when I arrived in Mexico. My friends nicknamed me Shirley Valentine when they realized I was so eager to escape the sameness of my life that I was ready to sell my belongings, shut the door, and follow the promise of warm breezes, music, and sunshine, just like the lead character of the then popular movie. If I had seen Paulo Coelho's quote back then, perhaps I could have convinced my friends of my sanity by triumphantly stabbing my finger at his words, saying, here, this is how I feel, read this. He said, if you think adventure is dangerous, try routine. It's lethal. And that is so the way I felt. I was so bogged down in routine. And I had been so bogged down in routine since the time I was maybe 8 years old. And I was so ready to have adventure. Being born and raised in a small town Iowa doesn't lead to much adventure or diversity. There's just none there. And it's, everybody's doing the same thing because that's what you do. And so being able to have this opportunity was really important. I was so ready to give up responsibility and routine and anxious to find adventure. I've had normal ups and downs of my life. Some moments could have been called, if not exciting, extreme. As it was with Shirley Valentine, it was the sameness of it all that forced me out of my nest with nary a how-to book and with no safety net. Shirley and I both walked out the door towards something more. Shirley found her adventure in the Greek Isles, while I headed south of the border down Mexico way. Getting to Mexico was the easy part. In spite of the conclusion folks might draw from the huge inventory of books written to help folks move to Mexico. Once here, though, I barely had time to unpack before I was submerged in a new life with a distinctly fresh focus. I was ready to meet the challenge of adjustment. I just didn't have the information I needed to participate in the colorful life joyously unfolding around me. I felt as if I'd lost my ability to speak, read, write, or understand. That helpless feeling, that inability to begin living my new life, prompted my desire to help newcomers shorten the learning curve. The result of that was the founding of Mexico Insights and Living at Lake Chapala, the magazine that she mentioned in the intro. Over the years, Mexico Insights became a repository of information and of the cues and clues needed to live in Mexico. When the publication of the magazine ended, it had a valuable cache of information. The 150 monthly issues between 2001 and 2013 yielded more than 1,800 articles on every aspect of Mexican life. So that became then a source for me to mine information for this book and for the upcoming books. My life in Mexico, like yours, is filled with lessons, insights, skills, delights, and occasional disappointments. And they're all reflected in the pages of this book. When you think about it, both adventure and life are all about the lessons we learn, the people we meet, and the mark we make. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that I've learned living in Mexico. Starting with probably my most important lesson, which was my trip driving to Mexico. My first trip was in May of the year 1990. I came back in August to check it out again to be sure that I was really comfortable with this decision. And then I moved here in October. And I drove down by myself from California and I crossed into Dallas. And I'm going to read you a few excerpts. I'm shortening this chapter immensely, but just to give you an idea. By mid-October, I was packed and ready to leave. I placed the cat carrier on the front seat, hugged my friends, and tried to reassure them before I climbed behind the wheel. Convinced that I would be raped and pillaged before I reached my new home, they wiped away their tears as I pulled out of the driveway. Blissfully ignorant and armed with a single-page map of Mexico from the Atlas, the bookstore, I pushed a tape in a cassette tape. I can't tell you how long ago it was. Braced myself for the experience of crossing the Mexican border at Nogales. Back in 1990, there was no internet full of sage advice on how to move to Mexico. There were no moving companies to get my stuff across the border. So I loaded my car with my stereo system, sewing machine, clothes, and the remaining fragments of my life, and my big black cat, and I left. I arrived well before dark in Hermosillo, found a clean, safe motel, settled the cat in the car with food, water, and fresh litter, had a lovely dinner and a great sleep, and woke up the next morning ready for the 3-day drive across Mexico to Lake Chapala. Preparing for the trip, I had made a huge mistake. I had been warned that mechanics might not be able to work on newer computerized cars. So I sold my nearly new Cadillac and purchased a mostly restored classic 1964 and a half Ford Thunderbird. She was a beauty. Red with white leather interior. And the crowning touch was the personalized California license plate that read in Spanish, Redbird. My thought process was logical and in accord with the advice I'd been given. The T-Bird's engine was simple enough for any mechanic. Much later I realized that with barely 8,000 miles on the odometer of the Cadillac, it would have been a long time before the Caddy needed to have a mechanic. I felt wonderful driving the Thunderbird and confident my friends were misguided. No one would dare rape and pillage while I was driving that fine car. The engine had a deep-throated hum that made the sunny day look even brighter until midday, when I was driving through the city of Navajoa and thought I was hearing the city's noon whistle. With a sickening jolt, I realized the sound was coming from my car. I pulled to a stop beside the mechanic shop, grabbed my little phrase book, put the cat here in the shade, and began the most interesting 24 hours of my life. In the next 8 hours, I stumbled and limped from mechanic to mechanic. In each shop, the men warned me of the dangers awaiting a woman alone in Mexico. They said I could be raped and pillaged. Next, they marveled at the cat. To a man, they were all sure any animal that large had to be a dog. In typical Mexican style, once we had done our allotted share of polite chatting, we would get to the problem at hand, my poor wounded T-bird. They cheerfully, kindly, and cheaply changed thermostats and radiator caps. They checked coolants and hoses. They poked and prodded and adjusted and fixed. Each mechanic sent me on my way with blessings and warnings to be careful of the other men I might meet along the roads of the states of Sonora and Sinaloa, who might not be true, respectable, macho Mexicans they were proud to be. Most of all, my mechanics wondered where my own men were. Where were my father, my brothers, my uncles, my sons, my nephews, and why would my men allow me to make this trip alone? Didn't they at least realize and understand that it could be dangerous for a woman to be out alone on the roads? Basking in the glow of their best wishes and under the watchful care of their assorted saints and virgins, I would sail out of each shop feeling protected and nurtured. Even the saints and virgins didn't keep the car from malfunctioning again and again as I crept along the hot, dusty two-lane road from mechanic to mechanic until dusk found me in a small concrete block tire shop far from any town of consequence. A single light bulb was swaying in the breeze as the men hanging out and exchanging the news of the day hunkered down to see what would happen next with my car and me. All day I had been focused, calm, and serene, as sure as the mechanics that the next thermostat would cure the problems. As the dusk deepened, I began to face the possibility of spending the night in my packed and disabled car along the side of the road or here in this mechanic shop. As more of the local men finished their day's work, they streamed into the little building, some with flats to fix, but most just came to talk, to pass the evening with among friends. They sent the neighbor children in a steady stream to the tiny store for more cold beer. Sometimes even I instinctively understand the proper behavior, even in a new setting. As they congregated and the light dimmed, I selected a convenient rock and waited some distance away as one man disassembled my water pump and another rode a single-speed bicycle to a distant part shop. They rebuilt the water pump on the ground with copious observations and advice from the congregation of onlookers, and then they welded the pump back together by arcing from the battery of the car. Just as the water pump was reinstalled, and mere seconds before true panic set in, my salvation appeared. When the tall, fair Mexican man with an authoritative attitude moved into the circle of light, other men sidled out of the way. He was the first person I'd encountered since I left the Arizona border who spoke fluent English. Never before nor since has anything or anyone seemed so clearly to be a gift directly from God. A friend fired a series of questions to the mechanics and then quietly explained to me that he was the foreman of the mechanics corps for the new 4-lane highway. He suggested he take me and my car to a nearby motel where his workers were staying. He warned me that the motel wasn't much, but that I would be safe for the night. So what sweet words those were, and how true they were on both counts. When we arrived at the motor court at the edge of a tiny crossroads village, 2 of the workers agreed to share one room so I could use the other. The manager came on the scene and demonstrated his vital role by sweeping the beer cans and cigarette butts from the room. Then he bustled to the office and returned with a single warm but clean bottom sheet to put on the stack of stained, time-curled mattresses piled on a concrete platform. I was grateful for the dim light bulb that kept most of the room's details hidden in the shadows. A friend left after assuring me that the workers had told all the other workmen in the motel that I was with him, and they were not to bother my car or me. His words were even more comfortable as the events of the night unfolded. After a day and a half in Mexico, I was almost accustomed to top toilets without seats. The Motel Troilus had an interesting twist on that theme. The seatless toilet was missing the tank. In its stead, beside the toilet was a small bucket of water to serve as a flushing mechanism, and a spigot with which I could refill the bucket. After a day of stress in the sun and dusty wind of northern Mexico's desert, there was nothing more important to me at that moment than a shower. I retrieved my overnight things from the car, including my pillow, a beach towel to use both to dry off and then as a cover if the temperature dropped below during the night, and the one remaining diet soda from the warm cooler. Drawing the nearly whole curtains over the glassless window holes, I turned out the single light bulb to undress, and then with shampoo, towel, and flip-flops, I approached the shower. Using my flashlight, I located the handles, turned them on, and waited, but nothing happened. Aiming the flashlight upward, I saw only tile where the shower head should have been. There had never been a shower head. And see, I know these things because I'm a plumber's daughter. There wasn't even a hole in the wall for the water pipe that should have been connected to the shower head. I was obsessed with the thought of being clean and cool, so pulling on a rope, I ventured out in the night with my shampoo and towel in search of the two kind workmen who were bunking together. I found them sitting on the stoop. In sign language, I explained and was invited to make myself at home to use their shower. While they waited outside, I first checked to ascertain that their room had a shower head. Then I undressed, and in the dark, I reached out to turn on the water to discover there were no handles attached to the stems. I couldn't get a good enough grip on the stems to turn on the water. Back in my robe, I explained my new plight and was awarded a pair of vice grips with which to manipulate the water, and had a wonderful, glorious, tepid shower. Back in my room, I was preparing to snuggle in to read, and then realized there was not only no lock on the door, there was just a hole where the doorknob should have been. Just like in the movies, I was prepared to shove the nightstand or the dresser against the door until I noticed that all the furniture was crafted of concrete. It was substantial and immobile. Besides, it would have been a pointless act. The creaking door opened out into the night. But I was determined to make the best of an interesting situation. I made the only reasonable decision at that moment. I washed down one of my 3 emergency Valium tablets with the warm soda and slept through the night. So then the next morning, a friend came back, and he took me to his house where his wife, mother, sister-in-law, sister, and children were waiting to prepare my breakfast. And then he suggested that I take a bus or a plane from Los Mochis, which was not far away, to Guadalajara, and then a cab to Ajijic. But I was still thinking with my Mexican head. I've become very fond of Mexican dichos, sayings. They don't call them proverbs or refranes or sayings. My favorite is cada cabeza es un mundo. Every head is a world. We judge everything we see by what we know. It's kind of like the Course in Miracles condensed in Mexican style. But we judge everything we know by what we see. Well, I was thinking with my American head, how could I take a cat and my sewing machine and all this stuff on the bus or the plane? Well, that wouldn't work. I had to rent a car, right? So all day, his mother drove me back and forth across this little village to the town's only telephone. When a call would come for me, some little kid would come running with a telephone call for the gringa, and then we'd go leap in the car and go answer the phone. By late afternoon, the company brought me a car. Renting that car was the only unpleasant, well, the only difficult. Well, that was the worst part of this whole thing. They kind of gouged me on the car rental. They gave me from 4 p.m. Wednesday until 9 a.m. Friday to drive the remaining 700 miles to Chapala. Their representative would take the bus, the overnight bus, and be in Chapala at 9 o'clock Friday morning to pick up the car. The base price of the rental is outrageous, plus they charged me mileage both ways, and 2 days' wages for the guy on the bus. That night, during the 5-hour drive to Mazatlan, I learned why everyone cautions against driving after dark. It wasn't banditos and it wasn't rape or pillage. I was whizzing up a mountain road when suddenly I caught a glimpse of a large truck traveling without headlights or taillights. It was just a car length or two ahead of me, creeping up the narrow mountain road. A car was careening down through the curves on the other lane. Thanks to the rental van's good brakes, I was able to rear-end him and didn't shoot off the cliff in the darkness. About an hour later, I had another thrill and came to a screeching halt in time to avoid hitting cattle strolling across the highway while I kept my eye on the horses that were congregating on the shoulder. By the time I reached Mazatlan, it was more than 15 hours since I'd had breakfast at a friend's house. I was too hot and tired to even look for the hotel restaurant. The diet soda I'd purchased at a gas stop was dinner. I stood for the longest time in the shower, marveling at the shower head and the shiny handles and the strings of hot water. Both the cat and I soaked up the air-conditioned comfort of that big room. Restored, I was back on the road bright and early the following morning. The cat was yowling, complaining for the first time in their whole trip. Perhaps he preferred the thought of life at the beach. I drove long, tedious hours on the twisting, narrow, pitted, 2-lane roads and arrived at the northern edge of Guadalajara about 4:30 p.m., just as torrential rain coinciding with the beginning of the evening rush hour hit the city. There were no overhead street signs back then, and there were precious few small street signs back then, and the ones that there were on the far side of the intersection on the side of the building, too far away to read through the rain. I didn't have a map. It didn't make any difference really though, because I didn't know how to where I was going anyway. I didn't have a map of the city. At one point, going over an overpass, I looked down and I saw the broken guardrail and looked down, and there was a car on its roof in the flooded street underneath. But clutching the steering wheel, I made my way through the rain and traffic all the way across the giant city, praying for signs pointing the way to Chapala, and there were 3. At least I wasn't worried about rape and pillage, not with all those cars and all that rain. By the time I reached the airport, I knew where I was. At least it looked familiar. My relief was short-lived when I realized that I had discovered the final cruel straw. The old 2-lane Guadalajara-Chapala highway had been removed at that time, since my previous visit, in preparation for the new 4-lane divided highway. The only Chapala-bound driving lane was just wide enough for the car, nearly 2 feet deep, and there was steel rebar poking out on all sides. It was inevitable that a rock in the channel would jostle the vehicle and impale a tire on one of those bars. I knew I was damaging the wheel, but I couldn't leave the deep channel for several miles. Finally, I got out of the trench and pulled up at the guardhouse of Aguas Escondidas. You know Aguas Escondidas, just on the far side of East Locacan. The guard gate swore that there were no phones there, or anywhere nearby. I knew he was lying. With dozens of houses, how could there be no phones? It's more than 20 years later, and there's still no landline service there. Today, however, the residents and the gate guard have cell phones. He offered to change the tire, but the rental van had no jack. The only remaining solution was for me to walk 5 kilometers to the village of Islahuacan de los Membrillos. It took me 4 years to learn to say that, by the way. Yes, for any of you who haven't been here that long yet, I always just said the IX town. And everybody knew what I was talking about. Islahuacan de los Membrillos. I can do it now. To find someone to change the tire or to call a friend for help. So at dusk and in the drizzle, along the demolished highway, I walked to the village and there found an office for making long-distance calls. I gave the operator my real estate agent's number. He wasn't home. I tried the only other Chapala number I knew, the sellers of the house I was buying. I felt that they had a vested interest in making sure that I got here safely, because I still owed them a whole lot of money. Unfortunately, the owner dashed my hopes of a quick rescue when he said he couldn't come get me. It was too dangerous for him to drive out there in the dark. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I just walked along the road that I now learned was too dangerous for this man to drive. It was later that I found out he was worried about cattle or horses and the torn up condition of the highway. I was just about going to try to find someone to change his tire when my agent called the little telephone office. He was with clients and suggested I go to the restaurant near the highway, out at the intersection, and have a drink. He'd send an associate or a cab right away. So I walked back out to the edge of East Labakan and stopped at a little restaurant that was there. And the owner lady didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Spanish, but I had my phrase book. But we had just a nice visit for the next 3 or 4 hours. Just after 11 p.m., the cab arrived to take me to retrieve my stuff and then bring me to Ajijic to the new Masada. It was weeks before I discovered that the restaurant and gracious hostess were, in fact, a house of ill repute in Nevada. Apparently, the rain had slowed her business. That journey was indeed my first Mexican adventure. I was alone in mechanic shops. I spent the night in an unlocked motel room surrounded by highway and railroad workmen. I drove after dark. I walked 5 kilometers along a highway in the rain. I waited 4 hours in a whorehouse. And I still wasn't raped or pillaged. Come to think about it, although I noticed a few appreciative glances, I didn't even have an offer. That trip set the tone for what I've come to expect in Mexico. Everywhere I go, I still feel surrounded by the kindness, the generosity, the love, the patience, the blessings, and the offering of the best there is to a stranger in need. It's no wonder that while U.S. will always be the land of my heart, Mexico is now la tierra de mi corazón, the beloved land of the beloved land of my heart. She just showed me the sign. I'm looking for something quick to finish with. I'm going to teach you a few hand gestures. I did this the other day at the book launch, but people enjoyed them then. I think you'll enjoy them now. I realized soon on that I needed to learn to speak and read and understand Spanish. I didn't realize that there was new body language and new hand gestures to learn. Until I went to a soccer game and I saw 2 soccer players across the field from each other. And the first one went, and the second one went, and the first one went, and the second one went. And the first one said, the second one said, you knew what I was saying. And later I said to the first guy, who was my contractor, and Rudy's too, I might add, I said, what was all of that? And he said, well, I said to him, where's my money that I loaned you? And he said, I don't have it. And I said, well, when are you going to get it? And he said, mañana. And I said to him, call me. And he said, come around later, we're going to have some beers. You all know that you need to ask for your bill when you're in a restaurant, right? You know why? Maybe somebody doesn't know why. It's because you are their guest, and it would be extraordinarily rude for them to suggest that it was time for you to leave. It'd be like when we used to go to my friend Peggy McCracken's house, and her grandfather would come out at 8:30 to the alarm clock. We got the concept, but it wasn't particularly polite. So if you want the bill, it's hard, you know, you can track down the waiter, but you can also just write on, like, pretend that you're writing. And he knows that means bring the bill, and he'll give you one of these, which is just a minute. Then when he brings the bill and you pay it, you leave your tip, don't try to transfer back and forth between pesos and dollars while you're doing that, please. Because he brings the bill and it's 100 pesos. That'll make the math easy for me. 100 pesos, and you're thinking, let's see, 100 pesos, that's $8. I want to tip 15%, that's 80 cents, another 40 cents, that's $1.20. See, $1.20 in pesos is, you're either going to leave him 5 pesos or 50 pesos, which was half the bill. Everyone does it. Stay in pesos. The bill, it's real easy. The bill says 100 pesos. You pull pesos out of your pocket. There's one that says 100 pesos. You put it on the thing, you're good. You know 10%, you know 15% of 100 pesos is 15. Pull out 15 more pesos. There you go. So if you've done the first method, and you walk away and you see the waiter go like this, in Mexico that means cheap. You have just squirreled him out of a tip, and he's not particularly happy about it. Don't use that, by the way, if you're trying to negotiate for something that you're trying to buy. It shouldn't be used that way. And even if you want to say to somebody, I'm cheap, don't use it that way either. It's not mean or nasty, it just isn't used that way. There's lots of other hand gestures, and she has given me the second message. Some of them have taken some getting to learn. And I think one of the most interesting is measuring height. We say, when I first came here, they'd say, well, don't you have, where are your men, don't you have sons? I have 2 sons, and they're big. I was gesturing that my sons were inanimate objects. If you're going to talk about how tall a person is, you turn your hand up this way, your forefinger. My sons are tall. If you're talking about a table, it's like you're running a hand across the top of it. The table is this tall. The armoire is this tall. If you're talking about animals, you turn your hand on the edge. And you can remember that one because horses are measured in hands, right? They're 16 hands or they're 14 hands. So that my dog is this tall. Oh, my dog's this tall. I'm a big dog. And that's kind of a handy one, and it's one that kind of makes us look funny when we say it. There's a chapter in the book that's called We Are the Entertainment. And the premise of that chapter is that it's not the money that we provide into the Mexican system that makes us popular and welcomed here. It's the bloopers that we do. And I did a talk yesterday for the British Society, and I was telling them, I was quoting from that chapter, and later the waiter came to me and said, there's another one. And I said, yeah? And he said, yeah. He said, one day, he said, I was waiting on these people, and he said, the woman said to me, "Tengo un hombre." And I said to her, "Shh, I have a man," is what she said. And I said, "Shh, your husband's there." And what she meant was, "Tengo hambre, I'm hungry." And I'm going to close with a little object lesson here, another little lesson. There's lots of other lessons in the book, but outside along the wall is this beautiful, beautiful vine. And to me, this is kind of like Mexico. We see that vine out there, the cascades of all these bright pink flowers. And we don't look below the surface. If you start looking, this vine is filled with little 4-petal flowers with little tiny yellow centers that are in a deeper pink little thingy. The buds are shaped like little lanterns and are in a very interesting shape. But we look at the big spot and we miss the details. And so much of the joy and the richness of living in Mexico are in the details. And that's what I'm hoping that you'll get from this book, is that this can be I can shorten the learning curve for you to to understanding some of the details. Do you have questions? We have 7 minutes in hand. We have 7 minutes for questions. Let me anticipate this. Whoever's going to ask me about the fireworks. Somebody's going to ask me about the fireworks? No? Oh, I can't believe that out of this many people. Somebody always asks about the fireworks. The fireworks are known to clear noise. Has been used by indigenous people for time forever to clear evil from an area. Before the Spanish came with gunpowder, it was shells and rocks and conch shells and all those things that were used to clear the evil. It's not just here. I read an excerpt from a book that was written in the 1700s about St. Andrew's Day in Scotland and about the college students that were out with pots and pans at 4 o'clock in the morning celebrating and doing a procession. Anyway, that's the fireworks. Okay, next.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Again, she proved the power of humor. I would like you to try honestly to answer this question. It's very important for me. How old do you think you were when you realized you were different?
Before I could remember. I didn't fit. I was convinced that I was adopted. I know lots of kids think that. I was absolutely certain that I had been adopted and I did not belong in that family.
So how old were you?
6, 7.
And are you still involved with your children?
Oh yeah.
And how many do you have?
I have 3 children. I have 2 sons that are 45 and 43 and a daughter that's 41. One is in Rochester, Minnesota, one's in Minneapolis, and one's in Iowa.
And did they come down to visit you?
They came a lot when they were in college and I bought the plane tickets. They don't come as often now, but they have to pay their own way.
And would you consider yourself a spiritual person?
Oh, absolutely.
Gracias.
Yep. Here's one behind you.
I understand from my limited Spanish that Cologne is Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
So how did a small, sleepy fishing village get a street named after Christopher Columbus?
There are streets all through Mexico named for Christopher Columbus, and it is Cologne. And please, 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 please put the accent on the second O. Otherwise, you have a colon.
Hi, Judy. That was wonderful. I can't wait to read the whole book. So you said when you first came down that you were very ill, fibromyalgia. Would you be willing to say, obviously your health must have improved. You couldn't have done all you did. So.
Yeah. I think, remember this is 1990. The first big outbreak in fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome had been in Incline Village, Nevada in 87, 88. And so very little was known about the disease at that time. They still don't know much because AIDS came on the scene at the same time, and the research time and effort and money went to AIDS because it kills you, rather than chronic fatigue syndrome, which only makes you wish you were dead. I think that my problem, my situation, and I think probably a lot of us, was environmental allergies. I was living in a home in Southern California, and we put in new underlayment, new carpet, new vinyl flooring, new vinyl wallpaper. My friend and I painted the kitchen cabinets. I made new drapes for the room, all those chemicals. I also was working part-time just before I got sick at a place that was like a Michael's, and I was a designer, so flower designer and Christmas designer. So I was spray painting Christmas balls, and I was doing all this kind of stuff. I spray painted a life-size horse in a Kruger and Ives animated scene at one point. I think all of those things played into it. And I think getting here, where our houses are brick and stone and concrete, with very little wood, and what wood we have is real wood. It's not plasterboard and fiberboard and pressboard and all those other things that aren't real. At the time I came here, we had very little upholstered furniture. It was mostly Chapala. And I think that all those things made a huge difference. The bells are just starting. That's another of the chapters in the book, by the way, the message of the bells. They tell you what the bells are saying. Anybody else? Oops, went back to the back.
Hello, Judy. I am Mexican, obviously. But I want to thank you the way you explain the scent and the smell.
Hold the mic a little bit closer.
I appreciate how much you wrote in your book about the smells, the sensations, and the kindness you found here. Thank you very much.
And thank you for being so kind to us.
Yeah.
I don't see other questions, but I surely want to thank you, Judy.
Oh,
it
thank
was
you.
a wonderful talk. Our presenter next week is Lou Roskin, The Human Species Relationship with the Natural World. He asks, what is your relationship with the natural world? Alienated, comfortable, abusive, respectful, isolated, compatible? He's going to describe the journey of our ancestors from the age of hunters and gatherers into the present time, and then the possibilities of going forward. So we hope to see you next week. Please turn your cell phones back on if you must, and dispose properly of your coffee cups and set your chairs. Thank you so much for coming.